The Department of Justice did its own investigation into the shooting death of Michael Brown, and they also investigated the Ferguson, Missouri police force to see if there was ever any wrongdoing when it came to discriminatory practices. Well, Eric Holder has announced that they will not press any charges against Officer Darren Wilson in the case of Michael Brown. However, they have found that some of the policing practices within Ferguson, Missouri warrant some changes. Okay, so according to CNN, the Justice Department is expected to announce that it won't charge Wilson for the shooting, but also expected to outline findings that allege a pattern of discriminatory tactics used by Ferguson police. Now, this was really interesting. I was very, very curious to see what type of discrimination they noticed. And one thing that they did mention is that the police chief in Ferguson has agreed to make these changes. If he does not make the changes, then the Justice Department will actually sue Ferguson, Missouri. But that will not happen because according to Thomas Jackson, everything they, meaning the DOJ, suggested in the past has been reasonable and we have tried to comply. Now, what is going on? What have they found that they're a little worried about? Among the issues expected to be part of the Justice Department's lawsuit are allegations made in a recent lawsuit filed by a group of low-income people who claimed officers in Ferguson and nearby Jennings targeted minorities with minor traffic infractions and then jailed them when they couldn't pay fines. Now, this is actually a really fascinating issue that you're seeing throughout the country, not just in Ferguson, Missouri. What will happen is a lot of the police officers will feel pressured to basically raise revenue for the city or the county. And the way that they do that is by just doling out as many traffic citations as they possibly can. In fact, in some cases, it makes up about 30% of the revenue in Ferguson, Missouri.
Now, some of you might view this as a curiously minor thing to start with because we've had, Michael Brown died. We've had a case of police abuse and questions about whether they should have shot and killed people. You're going to start on traffic violations and fines. But understand how important it is to the overall picture, because when they go to raise that revenue and they got to go give traffic violations fines out, who are they going to do it to? They're going to do it to the most powerless people.
Exactly.
And they're not going to do it to people like them. They're not going to do it to people in their neighborhood, okay? They're going to do it to people that they don't associate with. They're going to do it to black people.
Yeah.
And it's not a minor thing, number one, when you have these onerous fines on you. Number two, when they arrest you and put you in jail for that. That could ruin your career, it could ruin your life. But they do it with great regularity because to them, what difference does it make? Because they have a vision of what African Americans in that community are, which is not worth that much. What difference does it make if we ruin their careers? What careers? That's the kind of mentality that goes into practices like this. Whereas if you said to them, somebody from your neighborhood, I'm going to take a young kid, 19, 23, etc., and I'm going to put him in jail for not paying a traffic violation. You say, whoa, wait, but that's Bobby. That's Susie's kid. I know Bobby. He's a good kid. Don't do that to him. Mm-hmm. But you don't know Bobby when he's an African American in Ferguson. Yeah. So it's really actually an enormous issue. And it's also the tip of the iceberg. It also gives you a sense of how they deal with African Americans in other contexts.
Right. In this context, though, as I mentioned earlier, it's a really big problem throughout the country. First of all, we are supposed to outlaw debtor's prison. But this is a more modern version of debtor's prison where, okay, maybe you're not going to jail for credit card debt, maybe you're not going to prison for credit card debt, but you're going to prison because you're unable to pay for a traffic violation. Now, is that right? Is that the way that we should be handling situations like this? And I get it. In some case, if someone broke the law, they're speeding, they did something wrong, yeah, there should be consequences for their actions. We need to have laws in place to keep people safe. But at the same time, if someone doesn't have the means to pay those bills, you're only adding insult to injury by putting them away in prison. And by the way, who do you think pays for them while they're in prison? The taxpayers. So it's really a counterintuitive way of dealing with the situation.
We often lose money on that. We
Exactly.
don't gain money. And so let me add two other wrinkles. At first, just to be absolutely clear about it, if you owe private debt, you cannot go to prison, although they're beginning to change some of those laws throughout the country. But if you owe a debt to the public, to the government, you can go to prison. And that's why sometimes they'll contract out to private companies to collect the money. And when they don't, they say, no, technically it's government debt, so we can still send you to prison, right? So that's happening across the country. Now, the other part of this is that if you're rich, well, you have the money to pay the fine, so you're never going to go to prison, right? But if you're poor, you're middle income, this could affect you a lot more. So it's another way of taxing the middle class and the poor more, certainly a higher percentage of their income, and punishing them more because you don't care that much about them. Now, in this case, it happens to affect a lot of African Americans, but believe me, throughout the country, it affects plenty of white folks.
Look, I've gotten a ton of traffic violations, partly because I deserve them, right? But when you see cops focusing specifically on handing out traffic violations and not dealing with real crime that's taking place, it's because there isn't enough tax revenue in that county or that city. So for instance, in California, we have a big issue when it comes to revenue because of certain propositions that were passed in the late 70s that cap property taxes. Property taxes in California are capped at 1%, which is insanely low. So we lost a bunch of revenue after that property tax passed. And so as a result, what do we need to do to raise revenue? We start regressive taxing, right?
Yep.
So we start handing out traffic violations and giving people parking tickets and stupid things like that. And the middle class and the working class has to deal with it.
Absolutely. So the Justice Department here is beginning to look into this. This is part of their investigation. And of course, what we want them to be is fair. So if they look into it, whether it's this or stories about police abuse, if it happened, we want justice. If it didn't happen, if it's not targeted to any particular group, well, look, even if it's not targeted and it's police abuse, we want them to fix it. We certainly want them to fix it if it's against white people, Latino people, it doesn't matter, right? But if it's targeted more, that's even more unfair in a sense, right?
Exactly.
So the fact that the Justice Department is on the scene and doing that analysis is great.